we are about to go for a little walk at Clark Reservation. Looking at Thuya occidentalis. This is northern white cedar, also called arborvitae. Of course, this is not a true cedar. This is a member of the Cupressaceae, just like most false cedars, unlike the true cedar, which is in the Pinaceae, in the genus Cedrus. We'll talk more about this as we descend towards the lake. Got some hop hornbeam. We're still upland right now. We're up at this dry kind of outcropping with pretty thin soils, and so you're bound to find this Ostrea virginiana, eastern hop hornbeam, the Betulaceae. Just another shot of Ostrea. Here are those thin strips, these thin papery strips of bark that peel from top and bottom. Ostrea is often known to exfoliate. Exfoliating is peeling. This particular specimen of Ostrea is peeling quite a bit, as you can see. This is a very hard wood, also known as ironwood. It shares that name with a bunch of species. The main species around here is musselwood. Musselwood, Carpinus caroliniana, is also known as ironwood, also in the Betulaceae, the birch family. We'll look at that in a second. Here are the scaly leaves of northern white cedar. Here's the messy, dark, lenticulate bark of Rhamnus cathartica, European buckthorn, quite invasive here. It tends to have larger and messier lenticels than black cherry, Prunus serotina, or Prunus avium for that matter. Prunus avium is a mazard cherry, also invasive, which I would think is more easily mixed up with European buckthorn. These three stems here. In the background, we've got the bark of chinkapin oak, Quercus muhlenbergii of the Fagaceae. This is a common tree around here in the dry, thin soils on limestone bedrock. This tree is relatively shade intolerant and prefers droughty soils, prefers calcareous limestone soils, which there is much of here. And then to the left of the European buckthorn, we've got three stems of Tilia. This is Tilia americana, American basswood. The furrows beginning to appear at the base, where the tree is the widest, but the upper bark is smooth and gray. And you'll notice that there's 3 or 4 stems all sprouting from one spot here. This is very typical for Tilia. American basswood loves to basal sprout. It's constantly getting disturbed, cut down, and sprouting back. Here's that beautiful scaly texture of Thuya occidentalis, northern white cedar. Not much else has got those broad, flat, butterfly-like scales, at least not in the northeast. Of course, it's relative Thuya plicata, western red cedar, you'll find in the landscape planted, but you will not find it here in the woods. If we look over here, we've got gorgeous Juglans nigra. This is black walnut. That coarse, interlacing ridges with shallow furrows and that kind of off-brown color, right? It's a pretty distinct color. We'll look at it as we get closer. But that's black walnut. Looks almost like ash or tulip tree or Norway maple to an untrained eye. Here we've got two very typical members of the forest assemblage here. We've got on the right hackberry, Celtis occidentalis, of the Cannabaceae. On the left, we've got a relatively large northern white cedar. These two grow very commonly together here at Clark Reservation. Tucked away there in the forest, might be hard to see, a little covered in snow, but I know what this is. This is butternut. This is a butternut. That flat, ashy bark, Juglans cinerea, so it's the walnut genus, Juglans. Cinerea means ashy, so this ash-colored light gray bark, flat, relatively broad ridges, somewhat shallow furrows, and I can see right there, right in the middle of the camera there's a canker. I decided to approach the tree so you could see it better. That dark discoloration is from a canker, butternut canker to be particular. affects this tree all across its native range, responsible for the extirpation of this tree, largely. If we look up here, you could find more evidence. Most people might look at that and think, well, they might not think anything, not most people, but most tree people might look at that and think it's a branch scar, where a branch fell off and the branch collar closed up and cinched. But that is the long vertical diamond shape, often bleeding canker, which is the primary symptom of butternut canker caused by the fungal pathogen Ophiognomonia clavignenti juglundacearum. Here is the kind of bland looking matte bark, right? Not shiny, not lustrous bark of sugar maple. When you're first learning barks, if you ever struggle, look for a twig. A twig is a godsend. It helps you verify, especially if there's leaves on it. So the bud characteristics, if you were to pull that down, could tell you it's sugar maple, and the leaves, which are still clinging on, will also tell you the same thing. And in the background, there is our black walnut from before. Here we have another butternut. This one looks a bit worse. This is what happens when those cankers add up. A bunch of them occur, and they eventually all expand and meet up, girdling the tree, killing the top out. But yeah, cankers feed in the phloem and vascular cambium. That's what cankers do. And this is a very voracious one. These little frilled scrolls that are curling to the left and to the right, they tear along the perforated lines that were produced by lenticels that were stretched horizontally. This is yellow birch, Betula alleganiensis, of the Betulaceae, the birch family. Pretty common subclimax, climax species in the eastern U.S., northeastern U.S. Okay, the back's going to be a little bit overly bright, overexposed here, but kind of wanted to show you this bark, right and left. These two are the same species. The one on the right is smaller diameter, obviously, which is why it is smoother and is less furrowed and less aggressively ridged. The one on the left is older. This is Tilia americana, American basswood. Here we have a relatively large stemmed hop hornbeam, Ostrya virginiana. Don't usually get this big. This is an understory tree, but here it is. Looks pretty good. Here we have the young bark of green ash, Fraxinus pennsylvanica. Tight interlacing ridges and furrows. Pretty perfect specimen. Here we have two stems of American basswood coming off of the same butt, the same base, the same root system. This top one sprouted after this left one started growing. This one's obviously larger diameter, more mature, more developed bark, right? We see these flat, broad ridges, these furrows, very parallel, a lot less cross-hatching than ash, tulip tree, or a black walnut, let's say. Now here's a stem coming straight up. No furrows yet, but the beginning. You see those vertical lines there are showing you where furrows will appear as the bark continues to stretch when the tree continues to put on diameter. Here it is coming up here. Right, so these two are coming from the same base. If you look up, you got another group right here. All these little stems here, these are also basswood stems. All these little stems, all coming from the same root system, or at least from the same base. Tilia is not a root sprouter. It is a basal sprouter. So the sprouts will not come up from the lateral roots. Instead, they will come up from the base, from the butt of the tree, where it interfaces with the ground and the roots. There's that developed bark. And in the background, a young stem, smooth. Same color, though. See, that color is actually pretty typical. That very light gray, it's a pretty typical color for basswood. Here's a lone stem of Tilia americana, American basswood. That ridged and furrowed bark, those flat, smooth, shiny, almost ridges, and the furrows as the ridges pull apart. Now, when you're learning to identify bark, all right, you make your guess, you approach your tree, you make your guess, and then you do whatever you can to check your work, right? You need the answer key. for me, when I was first learning this bark, I knew the branching pattern of Tilia, which is very particular. You might not. You should study it. That's what I would advise. That's the branching pattern of Tilia. Now, you might be laughing and saying that just looks like a tree, but pay attention, look at it, and next time you're out, clip a bunch of branches off a few different trees and clip Tilia, clip basswood, and you'll know what I mean. If I were learning my bark for Tilia, this is what I would do. I'd look up here to check my work, and if I was right, I'd look back down and go, good, I'm right. If I was wrong, I'd look back down at the bark and say, okay, need to figure out what went wrong. And you keep doing this. Now, it's very hard to get to know your bark if you can't check your work, which is why I would often recommend learning bark, learning any feature of a tree really, in a place where you can verify the identity, either with a teacher or with a name tag, right, if you're at an arboretum or a botanic garden, or with some other feature that you're more confident in. So here is our basswood bark, shiny, broad, flat ridges. Very different from our ash bark. This is green ash, right? And these ridges, they do interlace. They interlace a little more aggressively, a little sharper. They're more X-like in the way they cross over and the way they interlace or interfinger. But these are also, they come to peaks. These ridges come to peaks. So if you were to cut one of these ridges in half, the cross-section would be V-shaped. It would come to a peak, whereas the Tilia ridges, the basswood ridges, are flat. They're totally flat. So if you were to cut one in half, rather than being like a mountain in cross-section, it would be like a plateau, right? It is flat across the top, as opposed to ash, which comes to a ridge, to a true ridge, like you would have on a mountain range. So, hate to do this to you guys, but look at these smooth gray stems, right? There's a couple of them here. We can tell they're all kind of coming from the same base. They're smooth, they're gray. No, they're not Tilia. Even though they're a little bit reflective, they are not Tilia. They are red maple. These are the stems. And to be truthful, they're either red maple or silver maple. In this case, I know for a fact that they appear to be natively hybridized Freeman maple, which is Acer X Freemanii, which is the hybrid between red and silver, red being Acer rubrum, silver being Acer saccharinum. This rough bark resembles both red and silver maple to me. For me, I cannot easily tell red maple from silver maple with bark alone. If there's a aggressive twist in the maple bark, I'll assume it's silver maple, often, because silver maple often twists the wood and the bark follows that grain. But with this vertical bark, this developed bark, it's hard for me to tell red from silver. Both would be happy down here. There's a frozen lake right in front of me. Right, there's a frozen lake out there. This is growing on the shore. Silver maples love wet areas. Red maples are also pretty good in wet areas. Sugar maple, less so. But this bark looks nothing like sugar maple. There we got some green ash growing right on the edge of the lake. Got green ash. Got more green ash. Right here, what do we have? We have Rhamnus cathartica. We have European buckthorn. Back here, right, we look at this mature stem. I know what this mature bark is, but in my opinion, the mature bark is a little harder to tell for this species. And so we look up here for a smaller diameter branch that exhibits the less mature bark, the more youthful bark. There we go, smaller diameter branch, very easily Rhamnus cathartica with those huge, messy lenticels. Right, so we have European buckthorn, ID'd by bark, primarily based on that younger bark that it's exhibited on the smaller diameter branches, rather than the mature bark, which is also distinct, but in my opinion, a little bit trickier. We approach European buckthorn, and we get a twig, right, and this is how we make our test. These twigs have sub-opposite branching and sub-opposite buds, which means the branches are almost opposite, and the buds likewise, because branches were buds, are also almost opposite. They are almost side by side. They are slightly skewed, as you can see here. And the branches terminate in a little thorn. That thorn is also diagnostic, as are the imbricate buds that kind of resemble cherry buds. But everything about this tree just screams European buckthorn. It is cold and beautiful. Look at that nice arching American basswood, Tilia americana. Gorgeous stem there, arching up. Got a bunch of them growing out of the snow here, right near the edge of the lake. And there's a more mature stem up behind them, basswood. This is actually a relatively unusual looking yellow birch, Betula alleghaniensis. A lot of people might mistake this for a paper birch just due to the color of the bark and the fact that there aren't these little fine frilling exfoliating strips. It appears to be exfoliating in larger sheets, which is more kind of like paper birch, but no. This is Betula alleghaniensis, yellow birch, rather than paper birch, Betula papyrifera. And here have fallen from the crown of that yellow birch. Here are the fruit. They are strobili, which release bracts and seeds. It's a cone-like structure. It's essentially what a strobilus is. If you look at the ground, all those little specks are actually bracts. They are bracts from that female fruit, from that strobilus. Female fruit is a little bit redundant. Those are the bracts that come from yellow birch strobili. They subtend seeds in the fruit. And if I ever run out of material, we can compare the bracts from the strobili of gray birch, yellow birch, paper birch, river birch, sweet birch, whatever other birch we want. They are different, in fact. These little bracts are slightly different shaped and different sized, depending on the species, so we can use these to ID trees. That is the bract, and these are the winged seeds to the right. These two little guys. So these are winged seeds. That is a bract. Bract, winged seed. Bract, winged seed. And there's a twig on the ground, ash twig. These ash trees are not happy. They are sprouting epicormically. They are sprouting lots of branches right out of the trunk, right from underneath the bark. This is not a happy tree. Another strange, untrustworthy yellow birch, Betula alleghaniensis. Relatively smooth bark for this age tree. And next to it, of course, we have our northern white cedar all around it. And that is a gorgeous specimen of yellow birch. Look at that yellow birch maintaining its smooth lenticulate bark into old age. It's wonderful. And behind it, I don't know if you can see, but behind the yellow birch there is a hemlock. You can identify it by the bark from that distance. You can also look up, and that branching pattern is very distinct to hemlock, that texture and branching pattern. Another wonderful demonstration for us of how smooth bark, smooth youthful bark, turns with age to rough and more furrowed bark. This is the bark of again, silver or red or Freeman maple. Again, I equate all those barks to be essentially the same. Yellow birch. Yellow birch. Edge of the lake, looking around, we've got ash, fraxinus, right? This is green ash too. All the ash is down here. Green ash likes the wet. You could check one by one, but I could tell you they're green ash. Another green ash behind it. What do we got here? Here we've got a red or silver maple. Let's get that light a little better. Red or silver maple. See that kind of like crinkly scale-like quality of the ridges? Almost looks to me like the ridges or the scaly bark, the texture at least of a honey locust. That is our red or silver maple. Another ash right there. Another red maple. Another strange yellow birch. Right, so not exfoliating. Kind of weird, kind of intransigent. Not what you'd expect from a yellow birch, but that's what it's doing. So, I don't know. Don't judge it. If you were to be very skeptical of my identification, you could jab a knife into the tree and smell the tip of the knife, and I guarantee you it would smell like wintergreen. And that's not sweet birch. Another yellow birch. Its neighbor back there is exfoliating, I'll admit, ungracefully. And this is what I expect to see from yellow birch. It's that exfoliation. That fine, textured, frilly, like a ribbon that someone's curled, right? That's what I expect from yellow birch, even more so than paper birch, which is obviously more pale, chalkier, but also exfoliates in larger sheet-like strips. Get used to learning the textures of conifers, foliated evergreen conifers. Who knows it? Hemlock, eastern hemlock. Tsuga canadensis, the Pinaceae. Go here. Very different texture, right? Scaly, different family to be fair. So the scaly foliage of a Cupressaceae plant, of a cypress family plant, as opposed to the needled foliage of a pine family plant like that hemlock. This is Thuya occidentalis. This is that northern white cedar from before. If we look up here, for some reason, there is a spruce. Nope, it's not one of our 3 native spruces. This is Norway spruce. It's probably seeded in from a plantation or a landscape tree somewhere nearby. Norway spruce, Picea abies. Right, so we have Pinaceae, Norway spruce, Cupressaceae, scaly, northern white cedar, and hemlock, eastern hemlock, Pinaceae, needled. We have American elm here, Ulmus americana, growing near the water where it likes to grow. That bark is very distinct. We'll go over that at some point. There's that gray bark and that arching stem and that characteristic branching pattern. Where is it? Branching pattern. Large fat buds. Only 2 bud scales visible. This is Tilia americana, American basswood. And here is a yellow birch cosplaying as a beech, right? So it's got those marcescent leaves. Many species of tree can do this, but, certain ones have more of an affiliation with this behavior. Look at that root system, very typical of yellow birch. Here's some hemlock bark and hemlock foliage, Tsuga canadensis, Pinaceae, right? You got these scaly ridges. It is ridged and furrowed and scaly. If you were to cut into one of those scaly ridges, you would see bright purple inside. Look at this foliage. No, it's not fir, it's not abies, and it's also not hemlock, right? It's not tsuga. This is actually a yew. This is our native yew. This is Taxus canadensis. You can see there's some little points at the tips of these needles. It's a lot pointier than eastern hemlock. And the needles are also longer than eastern hemlock. Eastern hemlock has shorter and more rounded needles. And the underside, you do not have these bright white stomatiferous bands as you would on eastern hemlock. I'll show you. Right, there are those bright white bands. Those glaucous, waxy bands that cover the stomata on the underside of needles on hemlock. And look at how rounded those needles are. Very much not a yew. A lot of stairs. Look at that. Yellow birch. Look at that texture. Those are the fruiting structures of yellow birch. Look at how distinct that texture is.